You're listening to What's Contemporary Now, a show about culture and the people, places, and things that together make it up.
Hi, I'm here to pick up my son Milo.
There's no Milo here.
Who picked up my son from school?
Streaming only on Peacock.
I'm gonna need the name of everyone that could have a connection.
You don't understand. It was just the five of us.
So this was all planned.
What are you gonna do?
I will do whatever it takes to get my son back.
I honestly didn't see this coming. These nice people killing each other.
All Her Fault, a new series streaming now only on Peacock.
In 2018, before podcasts were a pervasive cultural medium, Recho Omondi founded The Cutting Room Floor, a show originally described as fashion's only fashion show, which at the time kind of felt true. Today, after moving into video and producing a series of viral episodes, both Recho and her podcast have moved beyond the If You Know, You Know circles and into the broader public arena. Unapologetic in her curiosity and candor, she tells us that she's never experienced imposter syndrome or questioned her place in any room. While she may be a podcaster today, the future remains wide open. Her guiding mission is the same: to inspire others to think critically and ask questions and trust their instincts rather than simply accepting the status quo.
This is Recho Omondi, and we're talking about what's contemporary now.
Recho Omondi, we all know you, of course, from your incredible show and the various platforms that you've become a regular moderator and interview upon. But what about the early years, pre-designer, pre-all of that? What do we not know about you that kind of set you upon the path you tread today?
I grew up in the Midwest to immigrant Kenyan parents. I was raised by a single dad. My father got custody of me and my sisters when I was really young. I kind of grew up in these really small towns around America. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I moved by the time I was 1. I grew up in Dodge City, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, Lansing, Michigan, Champaign, Illinois, small towns throughout the middle of the country. But at the same time, because my father was raised in Nairobi, we were traveling to Africa very frequently, spending summers there in Kenya. And my father, out of his siblings, was the only one who moved to America. All the rest of his siblings, who were all sisters, they moved to different cities throughout Europe. So Stockholm or Paris or Brussels. And so growing up, we were always stopping to visit them while the end destination was Nairobi. And so I feel like one of the biggest influences on my upbringing was growing up in these very small towns, but having a very global perspective. You know, at 9 years old or 7 years old, you would be at London Heathrow and then in Brussels and then in Paris and then in Kenya and on the coast of Kenya and the city of Nairobi. And then I would go back for my school year in the middle of Kansas where people hadn't even left the tri-state area. You know, they knew Nebraska, maybe Oklahoma. When I look back on my childhood, I think I knew it was influential at the time, but as an adult, when I reflect, I think it was critically influential, like how I would jump from one world into another.
Critical is a key word, right? Because I think a broader subset of information in terms of our personal experiences allows us to have a more nuanced consideration of what we're encountering in the world and the sort of comparing and contrasting with different things. So I did want to ask how all of that travel, specifically the international portion, in your opinion, shaped the way you think about things and the way you approach conversation as a critical thinker today.
I was just so curious. I'm the youngest of 3. So you really have to fight to be heard and seen. And I think when you're a parent and you have children and you have the last born and you're a single parent, you kind of given up by the 3rd kid. Whatever rules and strictness you had with the first ones, you're kind of like, oh, to hell with it, as long as they're not dead, as long as they're safe and alive. So I think there was a lot that got, ignored or neglected. And in some ways it's positive and in other ways it's negative. But the positive side is that there wasn't a lot of micromanaging as to who I was or how I was showing up in the world. It was kind of like, bring your little sister, get her in the back of the car as long as she's here. And I think that allowed me to just really explore without a lot of expectation. My dad is what they call Afropolitan. So there's a sentiment of the brain drain, right? Where a country's biggest and brightest will leave that country to go pursue the Western world. And I think my dad is definitely a part of the brain drain. He became a doctor, an emergency room physician, and his goal was always to have very cultured daughters. And that was part of our extracurriculars, part of the way he raised us. We were not allowed to watch TV. He did not put a huge emphasis on entertainment. He didn't like passive entertainment, I should say. Reading was fine. Listening to music was fine. He thought those were active. passive he didn't like. We could not watch television. We couldn't go to the movies. We could on occasion. It was always a treat. We got to watch TV on the weekends. But for the most part, he wanted us reading. He wanted us learning. He prioritized education. He prioritized the theater, ballet, dance, musicals, music, travel, encyclopedias. That was very important to him. And I don't think that's dissimilar from a lot of immigrants. So I guess when I look back, I think travel was so critical because he really normalized it, my dad. A lot of the cues and references of my life are from my father. He really normalized airports and being in them and traveling and also seeing how well adjusted he was in these different places. My dad loved history. He loved politics. So we would land in Stockholm and he would make friends with, when you're younger and you just see adults talking at the table, my dad would be talking about the American healthcare system and what was wrong with it. So I guess as I got older, I'm so, so grateful because without even knowing it, my perception of the world was global. I was highly acutely aware at a very young age that not everybody lived the way we were living back home in Illinois. And I can't say that for a lot of my peers at the time. I think for some of them, even if they chose to discover things as they got older, it wasn't embedded to the fabric of their upbringing the way it was with us. So I'm grateful for that.
Was he the reason why you initially started upon a pre-med path before discovering your interest in fashion?
Yeah, probably. I think when you like your parents and you respect them, it's very common that you want to follow in their footsteps. He never pushed it on anybody, but I spent a lot of time in hospitals too. We always say that the nurses were our other babysitters because we were always in walking distance from them. Strategically, I think my dad as a single parent made sure that he was never too far from home. So we spent a lot of time in hospitals walking to the cafeteria with my sisters in the summers when we were out of school and hanging around the lobby. And so I think it was just natural that I was familiar with that. But when I really unpacked what my true interests were, it didn't take long before I understood that wasn't really where they lied. I mean, anyone who's taken an organic chemistry class can tell you it's not for the faint of heart.
What was the moment where you did realize that fashion was something that you were far more interested in pursuing?
I'd always been interested in it. And I think even before fashion with the capital F, like as an industry, I was just into the idea of make-believe. That's really where this starts. It was doing theater, doing plays. I loved Broadway growing up. My dad would treat us to go to New York to see like one Broadway play. So that stuff was very familiar to me really early. Les Mis was probably the first thing I sunk my teeth into. So it was more the concept of make-believe, me taking on characters. And because I danced my whole life, the idea of costuming was also very natural to me. You do recitals, you have to have fittings and, your needle and thread. And there's a very specific way you need to show up in your attire in the world of dance, specifically ballet. So the idea of hair, makeup, tutus, thread, needle, sewing things, and fittings was also something I was familiar with. The concept of fashion as an industry didn't really come until I was probably in college. I first went to University of Illinois where I was pre-med for 2 years. And I think at that time I was delaying studying for an organic chemistry class, but I would love reading magazines. I read Vogue. I read all of, the glossies. And again, I loved shopping with the limited budgets that I had and would love to find new things that, at that age, you're imitating what you saw in the magazines. So I'm like, so-and-so wore this, or the tabloid culture was really big. I saw Lindsay Lohan and Rachel Zoe style, Nicole Richie. You're trying to mimic it. The Olsen twins were also a really big fixture for style for women my age. But when I realized I could study it was when I was procrastinating to study it for a test. And my friend had said, if you paid as much attention to organic chemistry as you do to studying these magazines, you could probably get further in the class. And I was like, okay. And literally a month later, we were going on spring break and I lied and said I was going on spring break with my friends. And instead I went to Savannah College of Art and Design and I did a school tour. Because my dad's the kind of dad that you can't come with a half-ass plan. You got to know what you're going to do and you have to have already thought about it. So I went on a school visit by myself and I started discovering these art schools and these design schools. And I came back and I presented it to him and I was like, here's what I want to do. And we had a very long conversation about if he was going to pay for it, what the stipulations of that would mean and X, Y, Z. But that was the first time I realized that it could be like a discipline.
And you went on to have your own label for an impressive 7 years. So let's talk about the onset of that plan, because it's one thing to be interested in fashion, but to decide to foray your own path that way is admirable.
Yeah, it was naivete for sure, but I was super convicted. I felt very convicted. I studied as a pattern maker by the time I graduated Savannah College of Art and Design, where I did end up going. I loved pattern making and I loved the craft of making garments. At the time, my biggest inspiration was Alexander Wang. He was like this 22-year-old kid who had built this family business with the support of his sister-in-law and his parents. And it felt like such a young, fresh perspective on fashion at the time. And also the model off-duty look, which is something that the brand kind of coined. It was also a little bit hip hop and a little bit street. And some of these references that we think are very normal now, at the time, it felt very new.
Mm-hmm.
So I was attracted to the fact that he was so young and was able to do it. So I thought, I'll do it, having no idea that I was not anywhere near as prepared or equipped, rather, as I needed to be. But as these things go, it's a learning lesson. And so I see that brand as 5 years of business school. Everything that maybe somebody would have learned in business school, from IP to trademarks to budgets to payroll, I just learned by fucking up, basically.
And having made the jump into this particular space, because there was a little bit of crossover, right? You didn't close the brand until 2020. You started the pod in 2018. So at what point did you decide that this was an extension to what you were already doing that you wanted to pursue?
When I realized how hard it was to run a fashion brand. So I say all the time that the cutting room floor of the podcast was born out of angst, because I was in the weeds of trying to get this brand off of the ground. And even though I loved it, I always felt misunderstood by other people, specifically people in the media, who didn't understand what we did as designers. They would look, why aren't you in this store? Oh, you know what you should do? And they would give you some very easier said than done thing. Or the journalist, quote unquote. I was with somebody who was the fashion director of style.com at the time, and we were in Cape Cod and we were talking about a retail space. And I said, I don't think the store is doing very well. And she was like, how do you know? And I said, XYZ, kind of pled my case. And she was like, well, I don't know. I don't really know anything about retail. And it was like stunning to me, because I was like, you're the fashion director of style. You don't know how retail works? But I realized at that time that everybody was really siloed in their own vertical of the business, that nobody was really having a conversation. And yet the designers, to me, felt like the forgotten child. I felt like people kind of forgot that the reason why we're all gathered here today is through these people who are making these clothes. So at that point, I just bought a microphone and I was like, okay, everybody, we need to talk. And those early episodes were really me getting out frustrations, but also still interviewing colleagues of people in the business and trying to get them to explain the nuances of their craft and their job.
Yeah, I think some of the early episodes that I recall listening to, I had first discovered the show via a colleague who had shared the James Scully episode with me. And then I listened to, was it Lynette Nylander around that time, and someone from Essence. And they were just such engaging conversations, because while it was clear in certain sections that you were quite studious and really taking advantage of these opportunities to learn different corners, you had a very informed and what felt relevant way of asking questions and getting answers that I think suddenly became interesting to everyone. But at what point did you feel like you really got the hang of things? Because obviously you've been at it for 7 years now.
Oh my gosh, any day now. Any day now. I think there's been different stages of getting the hang of it. It depends on what you're referring to. I mean, there's the asking questions, the research, the operation, the edit. There's a lot of different moving parts to this.
Absolutely. It definitely doesn't come across as though you're in any way unsure of yourself, and whether or not it's saying what you think or taking every opportunity to really continue growing the brand and your own sort of career and voice in the larger conversation has definitely been something worth admiring. It's interesting because I think a lot of people always look at a story like yours or at a moment of discovery where someone becomes the obvious person to know and just feel like, oh, they came out of left field. It's this overnight success, kind of dismissing or at least being unaware of what went into arriving at where you are today. So what would you describe that journey like? Because even when you had that conversation with Tyler, the creator, or any number of people, you kind of ask a very human question about whether or not it's anxiety, uncertainty, or whatever. So is that something you still find yourself navigating, or do you feel like you've found your bearings at this point in terms of being a voice?
I think I found my bearings in that sense. I don't think I've ever really struggled with imposter syndrome. I feel like every room that I've ever been in, I deserve to be in. It's more like, most of my standards and criticisms, as cliche as this sounds, are things that I impose upon myself. When you have high standards and when you're a creative or creator, the gap between where you are and where you want to be, you will be constantly trying to bridge that gap. When I first started designing, my work was bad and it was referential. Everything I did looked like Rec or And Mulemeister. That was also the time. Everything was like black or white or shapeless. And I hadn't developed my own voice yet. As a designer, I just knew what I liked and you tried to replicate what you like. I think as you grow and you get older, you lean more into who you already are or hopefully you are. So I think what was interesting is that when I got on a microphone and when I met people, I didn't feel like I was trying to be anybody else. I felt like this was actually the easiest thing. And I think as we, again, get older, you go where the fish are. You stop trying to swim upstream and be the thing. In my mind, I wanted to be this esteemed designer. I'm like, but in reality, what you're good at is talking. It comes so naturally to you. My father used to say, Recho, she's never met a stranger. Because when we'd be at Walmart or at the mall, I would run into, oh my God, that's so-and-so from school. Hey, Mrs. So-and-so. Like I would just talk to everybody. So that part, there's no imposter syndrome at all. And I don't care who it is or how big they are. I really genuinely see everybody as human. And there are people that you're excited about where you're like, whoa. But I think even then, when it comes down to being face to face, everybody is remarkably human, right? Like, haven't you felt that feeling where you have somebody on a pedestal and then you meet them and you're like, wow, you're just like me?
It's interesting because I also think more often than not, guests show up slightly nervous about the fact that they know the conversation is being made for public consumption. And I think that automatically humanizes them as well, no matter how much reverence you had for them ahead of that moment. But I think when it comes to the evolution of conversations that we're comfortable in having, there's still going to be moments where maybe someone feels as though it's a subject or a person or an environment that's quite daunting. And you just said that's never been your experience. So what do you credit for that level of self-assurance? Is it your father, your upbringing? Is it just inherent?
I think it's probably a mixture of everything. It's like nature versus nurture, right? For sure, it's my father and his influences and wanting us to be articulate, well-read, educated young women. Then I also think I have that like youngest child rascal energy in me too, which is a little bit defiant and pushing boundaries. Here's an interesting dynamic there too. I think when there's a mother in the household, mothers tend to be incredibly emotionally aware and they can almost act as the emotional bellwether for the husband as to how well the children are feeling and how they're doing. Are so-and-so's doing good in school and that kind of thing. Because women can have a tendency to be so tapped in that way. But because there was no mother in the household, and this is my own theory, this has not necessarily been verified by any kind of psychological professional. But I thought about this a lot. Because there was no mother there, I feel like there was not a watching eye on us in the way that women can pick up nuances and ways that I have found that straight men who are working 40 hours a week cannot pick up on. And so I think that there was, I don't want to use the word negligence because it wasn't that I felt there was negligence, apart from maybe emotionally. But I think because nobody was micromanaging, watching my every move. My dad's rules were very simple. Get good grades, come home on time, clean your room. Apart from that, I really did have carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. I could dress however I wanted. I could look however I wanted. There was a lot of freedom as long as we were studious and as long as we paid rent through our grades. That's what he used to say. So I think when I did that, I moved around a lot. So I had to be socialized very quickly. You learn the social patterns of kids very quickly when you're jumped into a new school every 2 years, which is essentially what happened to me. And you pick up on what people need, all of the unspoken things, what they're saying, what they're not saying, and you can become very adaptable. So I don't know, it's nature versus nurture. Is it me being born last? Is it me being born to my father? Is it my mother not having been there? Is it me loving fashion and having exposure to the world in global airports at such a young age? But I felt confident. And I think in anything, if there wasn't somebody encouraging me, which there wasn't necessarily, there was at least never anybody discouraging me. And I think that was actually very powerful.
Do you know what your Myers-Briggs is?
I don't.
Really?
What would you guess?
Well, I would definitely go with something that starts with E, but is it a fair statement to say that you are an extrovert?
For sure. I'm not shy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Derek Blasberg made fun of me on the episode we had done with him because I told him that I didn't know I was an introvert until I took that test because I just assumed that introverts were quite reserved and reclusive and quiet or shy. And I don't really think of myself as any of those things. But over time, you start to realize that it's a spectrum, right? You're not necessarily entirely one way or the other. And once I understood that, I thought it was quite eye-opening. But going back to the podcast, speaking of being an extrovert and obviously having achieve the success with it that you have. Do you think when you guys decided to move over to incorporating video, that was a key kind of pivotal moment in the show's success?
Oh my God, yes. Night and day, for sure. I had always wanted to pivot to video. It felt like a very daunting task. The audience had said multiple times that they were interested in that. But again, I don't come from media. I come from traditional product development. All of this was new to me. And once I figured out how to do that, then I honestly wish I would have done it sooner.
Well, you guys have had a number of viral sort of episodes in terms of the show to date, but that doesn't necessarily always correlate to personal favorites when it comes to those moments that you've shared with your guests. So which episodes really stand out for you?
People ask me this all the time and I cannot answer it because I kid you not, every episode is a gem to me. Every single episode, every single person has something of value, some little chocolate chip that I'm like, oh, I like try to seek wisdom out of people too. So I think that's why.
Yeah, and I feel like that's palpable listening to the show. For me, a full circle moment was having Tim Blanks on, because when I was growing up, he was hosting Fashion File and I would watch him constantly while eating my Cheerios. And just the way he could animate worlds with meaning through nothing but the spoken word was such an introduction to that world for me. But who has that person been for you, if anyone at all? And if not in relation to the show as a guest, who were those kind of aspirational figures for you growing up?
I think in terms of the show, Terry Agins was a very influential guest. She is a Black woman who was covering fashion at the Wall Street Journal for 20 years by herself, by the way. She introduced the fashion beat at the Journal. And I discovered her book randomly, The End of Fashion, and I couldn't put it down. And the fact that when I turned to the back page of the book that I saw a portrait of a Black woman was honestly just like an extra cherry on top. I was like, wow, who is this person who knows so much? Since then, I think she's kind of acted as like my very journalistic godmother. I'm a podcaster. Some people would argue that's not a journalist. And yet she has still given me so many notes after almost every episode. Like she will email me and be like, this was good. This was wrong. You should have fact checked this before you publish that. Some of those things that you would learn at a standard journalism school, she just tells me like it is. She's like the dream mentor you wish you would have had. And she didn't have children. She's honored that I even care about her opinion. I think we have a nice relationship in that sense that I care about what she has to say. And she wants to impart her wisdom on somebody younger. And she's interviewed the greats. She's interviewed everybody. And to do it at a business pub with the Journal, I think is distinctly different from doing it at a fashion magazine. So I appreciate that. But in terms of my personal life, I think I made my own heroes. I think I really did. I mean, my dad in many ways is a hero. I definitely adopted a lot of who he is. And I think I probably have a little bit more masculine tendencies than I wish I did, just because that's what I saw so much. Memorabilia and ephemera that I used to see in his room and things like that. Apart from that, most of my heroes were like make-believe. They were characters in movies. They were characters in books. It was Harriet the Spy. I mean, I loved a coming-of-age film. Any young girl who I felt like was irreverently smart, again, Harriet the Spy was a critical one because I didn't see much of that represented in women. And that's how I felt I was, curious and strong and convicted. Like, if I found that in a character, I would latch on to that person.
It makes sense. It's all filtered through the lens of our own personal experience. And one of the things I find makes for the best podcast episodes, regardless of whether or not you have a background in journalism in any official capacity, is this ability to explore the anthropological and sociological threads of our time through the lens of whichever person that you're talking to. And over time, you begin to sort of discover anything from common tropes and cliches to the common threads of humanity or contemporary culture that exist quite frequently in a number of different people's stories. So what sort of common threads have you encountered during the time that you've been doing the show?
That capitalism is at a breaking point. That somehow rears its ugly head in almost every episode, somehow, some way. And most people feel the speed at which we move, and it's exhausting to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one really common theme. I think the other theme is our relationship with technology. That comes up a lot, and how we can sever ties with it while also needing it. Just the conundrum that we're in as a species. Obviously, then AI on the precipice of that. But I would say that's two of them. I mean, you notice like this dotted line principle that these things keep coming up in these different moments. The other big theme, though, is that like fashion really isn't about clothing, which we know, but maybe some people don't. I think that's also what I look for in episodes. Is this a fashion interview, meaning like style and clothing, or can I find something else? Because I'm not in fashion for clothes. That's actually not why I'm in it at all, really.
Say more.
I mean, don't you feel this? Like there are people, and by the way, I appreciate these people. It's like eye candy. I could look at a well-dressed person all day, and those kinds of bloggers or like TikTok, people are showing you style, where there's like no sound, they don't talk to the camera, or image making, some of the best image makers of our time, the best photographers. I love that stuff. Because again, it's about the make-believe. It's about the heightened fantasy of how beautiful a woman could be or what a man could look like, etc. But that's not what I'm in it for. I don't feel like I'm competing in that game. I feel like I look at fashion as a vehicle for what you just described, which is like social anthropological storytelling. It's almost like it's more about fashion as in the way in which we do something, right? So like in what fashion would you do something? It feels more behavioral than it does feel aesthetic. And I love aesthetics. And I think that it's an art form. Aesthetic intelligence is a real thing. But my intersection with the fashion industry is not about getting dressed. It's just not, at least not yet. Maybe I would if I had more resources to do that, if I just had a stylist working with me all day. But we're at a stage in my business where I wake up and I shoot and I'm in my office all day. So I don't know. When you get away from the industry and you get away from the business of it, if I took you to Nairobi, you would see fashion everywhere and it's not branded. It's just a way in which people are dressing, the way they move, where they go, what they say, how they say it, their slang, their lingo, their style. To me, that's fashion and it's cultural and it's regional. And I try to unpack nuggets of that with every episode. And if there is a branded cultural celebrity linchpin in that episode, then fine, because I also have to contend that we're talking in real time about the real world, a runway moment, a red carpet moment. Those things are important because I think that's the glossy entertainment value that it brings to the show. But it's not like the mission for why I'm doing what I'm doing.
I wanted to also explore this idea of being in rooms, right? Because we talk about having chances coming up in any industry. Obviously, in the context of this conversation, we're speaking about fashion, but people often refer to the chance to be in a room, right? And you've certainly found yourself in a series of exciting rooms in terms of access. And sometimes those things happen on the wings of a personal relationship. And sometimes we simply have to open the door ourselves. So I wanted to touch on that and see if there were any rooms you've yet to enter that you still want to explore.
I have this sense that any room that I want to be in is on its way to me. Like I said, there's never been a room that I've ever been in that I was like, I don't feel worthy of this room. Every room that I've ever been in, I'm like, oh, finally. I knew this room was coming, but it's never been the imposter syndrome energy. But I think it's kind of that adage of what you seek is seeking you. In my mind, when I aspire towards something, I feel like it's already happened. I haven't realized it in the third dimension yet, but it's like, oh, done. On the mood board, I've listed that. I want to do that. And now I'm just waiting for it to happen. So there are people who are on the list or interviews I would love to do and people I would love to meet. But I'm just like, yeah, in due time. Like there's no need to rush because we're on this conveyor belt of life and it's moving. It's moving. You're just not at the end yet. No need to have any anxious energy about who I'll meet or when I'll meet them or when I'll get in the room. Like divine timing is such a real thing.
Yeah, it sounds like you're hitting all the marks. Are you big on things like manifesting?
Yeah, but not in the way that it's become this kind of pastime. I feel like I've always been manifesting. I think it's just if you can make your desire reach the highest quotient of your belief, ultimately, because you can't trick your body. If you don't believe in it happening, it's not going to happen, you know? So if the quotient of your desire can meet the quotient of your belief, that is manifesting. I mean, also you have to put action-oriented effort behind it too. But I think manifesting is like biblical. Somehow it's become this new wave, thing, but that's like biblical. That's ancient text. Ancient people have known how to do that. It's about walking by faith, not by sight, and writing the vision down and making it plain. And don't despise the days of small things, right? So when you feel like you're making no progress, you still keep going and it will compound. And one day you will reap a harvest. Do I believe in manifesting? It's like saying, do I believe in God? I'm like, of course I do.
Speaking of a different kind of Bible, you recently said that Anna Wintour should have retired back in 2010 and that you think Vogue sucks, which of course I laughed out loud when listening to. But I've also listened to you long enough to know, even within the span of this episode, that you do have a tremendous amount of respect for legends, both of past and present. And so it's more personal opinion than anything, but say more.
The caveat there is that it's American Vogue that sucks. I think Vogue as a franchise is still brilliant in so many other countries, which also begs the question, why does it suck so bad in America? What would be the excuse for that? Listen, Anna Wintour is a bona fide icon, legend. I would love to sit down and interview her. I would love to see the human side of her. But no, I don't think she stewarded the magazine. If the benchmark of Vogue is to be cutting edge, if it's to be aesthetically intelligent and beautiful, if it's to pioneer amazing new talent, the question would be like, what is the mission statement of Vogue? But if it's any of those things, it is not hitting those things anymore. And it hasn't been for a long time, which is strange to me because I looked up to Vogue for so many years and it was this kind of beacon of taste and intellect for women. And it's not just women. I mean, that's silly, like for people. You could learn so much and there would be a beautiful story on politics. It was well written. The art directing was beautiful. The graphic design was amazing. The models, the clothes, it was such a comprehensive package. I think that the entering of the digital era, I don't like that word because it's like, what's not digital? But the internet, I think she started to really lose her grip then. And I actually think that's okay. She was in her late 30s when she took the role. It's been almost 40 years. It would have been amazing if she would have handed the baton to somebody else who was around the same age that she was when she took it. Because when you're in your 30s or late 30s, hovering around this time, and we've seen so many great people take the helm of a company when they were around this age, it's such a sweet time because you're still so young, but you're mature enough and you're old enough and you've lived just enough that you can synthesize what was your past, but yet you're young enough to be able to invent a future. So I think appointing people when they're around that age, whether 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 40, that's a really good age to throw somebody the baton. But I don't know. I just believe that it's kind of run dry. And that's not just Anna, that's just the institution. The print doesn't move the way it used to and the way that their relationship was with the advertisers and everything became an advertorial and everything kind of just became like payola, but for fashion. So to me, the best time would have been for Anna Wintour to have stepped down around 2010, 11, right at the onset of blogs, of desktop, of those bloggers contending with legacy editors. And we've moved from that to mobile. I just feel like it's hard to keep up. And whether she has power or not in terms of the Met and Condé and overseeing things is another conversation. But I really think she should have handed it off to somebody. And not only that, but been scouting that talent, if not cultivating that talent herself. And I think that's what mentorship is.
What do you think of Chioma's British Vogue?
I think I have to pay attention to it more. Unfortunately, I'm in this place where we're so head down. And when you're super focused on building something, and people don't talk about this enough, you miss out on the things that are happening around you. But when I was less busy with my, I don't know, was there ever a time? But when I was less busy on my own thing, I was digesting more of what was going on. And that was what was cultivating my shape and my taste and my opinions. And there's something I could sacrifice. I don't know if people talk about this. When you're looking down and you're building something every day, I'm effectively building a media company right now. What gets lost is me consuming all these other things that used to be part of my daily diet. So I can't even speak to Chioma's Vogue because I haven't really been paying attention to it because I'm working all the time. And that's honest.
It's so interesting to hear because one would assume that in the process of cultivating a successful media brand, there has to be a certain degree of intake, right? At what point do you go back to being a voracious consumer so that you can synthesize that information in a way that's uniquely belonging to your perspective and what it is you're putting out into the world? So let's stay on that for a minute because that's fascinating. In the absence of consuming that information and kind of being aware of that market analysis, what is informing the decisions along the way? Are you just at a point where it's at our instinct or how are you building it out without that awareness?
Sometimes it's instinct, but I think, it can happen in chapters. And I think recording artists go through the same thing. Like they're working on an album. So they're in it and they're in the studio every day. They tell NASCAR drivers, focus on the road, not the wall, right? You have such tunnel vision. And then the album comes out and they look around again. They're on the press tour. They're doing the things. They're on the red carpet. They're shooting the music video and you're influenced by other people again. And so I think it's like that. It's not an indefinite thing. It's just like a season that I'm in right now. You know what I mean? And then you get to look up again. For me, it's about the part that I'm hiring a lot now. And so I'm also delegating. So a lot of what I'm spending my time doing is operational. There's not as much creativity happening right now because I think creatives think that the whole thing is creative. And I'm like 10% and then 90% is getting it executed and building systems so that it can be repeated. So that's where I'm kind of spending my time right now. And that doesn't mean that there's no creativity coming down the pike or that we're not going to access that again. But right now I'm trying to set up teams so that they can also repeat what needs to be done. But at a certain level of standard, here's what I expect going forward. As far as episode by episode, I'll always dig back into research because we have episodes coming out, but the research is specific. It's like, okay, here's the upcoming guest. We want to know everything. Even you, I'm so impressed by how well researched you've been before this interview and all of your other ones. We want to gather and glean as much as we can about that person. And sometimes that will take me down rabbit holes that I didn't realize because we're in the pursuit of the story around this person. Like, oh, did you know that they did this interview in 1991 on Charlie Rose? Go watch it. I live in New York City, so magazine shops are not infrequent. I would have a Saturday with my fiance and we were at the MoMA and we almost didn't make it because it was so close to closing. And so we went and we're members and we don't use the membership enough. And so we went and like, that's one of those moments where I'm like, okay, I'm able to see the outside world and what's going on, what's being exhibited. What are we talking about? Was that a good show? Who curated this? This was fantastic. Then you get to get on Google on your way home and be like, who was the person who did that? Okay. Oh, our friend did that. Amazing. It's like in these little vignettes of moments where you get to tap in, lock in with what's happening. But lately, my life is wake up, work out, come to the office, be here till 7. And then sometimes I have a dinner with somebody and then I go home. 2-3 weeks can go by or a month. And I didn't see who was on the cover of the latest issue of something that just came out. I'm at a stage now where I might be late on that news. You know what I mean? But how do I build a team who's not late on that news and that they can make sure that they're staying up to date on the pulse of things? When you're building something, everything that is worth having is sacrificial. Some part of it is sacrificial in order to get it. And I'm at a stage right now where the sacrifice is seeing everything. Because I used to pride myself on seeing everything. If it was an album, I heard it. If it was a movie, I saw it. If it was a play, I went to it. If it was a party, I was there. In my 20s, that was me. I was everywhere. And somehow as you get older, you kind of are narrowing out. To me, it feels sacrificial because I used to be very proud of that. I would decided very young that I was going to make culture my career. Very young. I decided I was going to make that my business, to know what was going on. So if there's any part of me that feels like they don't know what's happening, it feels like a sacrifice in pursuit of this thing that I'm building.
I mean, it is so fascinating to hear you put it so eloquently, because I think a lot of people do feel quite at the mercy of needing to know everything and not miss whatever post they didn't see that then was referenced in a conversation. I actually did an episode with an editor who's very accomplished and admitted off the record before we were recording that they had been in conversation with this incredible designer, yada, yada, who had turned around and asked if they were interested in art. And they lied because they didn't want to not know an artist that they might have mentioned if they said yes. And it just really underlines what you're saying, which is this need to feel as though you know everything about everything. And I do think everything you're saying is absolutely true when it comes to investing in the development or cultivation or creation of anything quite meaningful. Sometimes it does come at the cost of being an audience member full time because there are so many hours in a day. And again, going back to what it is you continue to build, it is a beautiful proof of concept that you can tap out and lock in and come back to the river. And although it might not be the same river twice, you're not going to lose just because you missed a week's worth of content. So that brings me to another question. What is your relationship to social media outside of the content you put out yourself?
I love it. I love TikTok. It's my favorite thing ever. I think it's genius. It's so funny. Instagram, I don't really spend that much time on. I just post a clip and then I leave. But Instagram's not really going to capture my personality because I don't share it there. But TikTok is where it's at, man. I think it's so genius. It's like America's Funniest Home Videos. It's also like Jackass on MTV. It's such a genius app to me. And I mean this non-ironically. I love being able to tap into Gen Z in this way. I love how non-judgmental TikTok is, whereas Instagram still feels very editorialized. You can just show up as you are. You can look like crap. You can have pimple cream on. They're very non-judgmental to very come as you are church. I love how democratic it is that somebody in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, can go viral because they had some piece of content that was just so relatable that it was like a wildfire. The comments are nicer. The comments are so active. People have a sense of humor. They're all in on the joke. There's a culture to TikTok. And this is what I mean by like fashion, like a set of behaviors, a regional set of behaviors that this certain group of people do. That's very palpable there. The way they move, the way they receive content, the way they talk. It's such a genius app. And I also think it's such a leveling app. We thought social media was doing this before, but TikTok took it to a new level in terms of how we can all communicate in real time. Somebody can post a cat video and making it 60 million views in 12 hours, no language, and everybody can understand the humor in it. I think it's been very eye-opening into how connected we all are as a globe. And that could be a whole other conversation in terms of collective consciousness and how quickly it could reach everybody and things like that. So TikTok, yeah, I love it. Instagram's harder for me because I've been on it for so long. I'm in my late 30s and TikTok feels like leaving and going to a new town. Instagram feels like all your high school friends still going to the same bar. It just doesn't feel like there's fresh water flowing in. It feels like you're sitting in backwater.
I love the metaphors, by the way. You have great ways of describing things.
Thank you.
Sitting in bathwater.
Yeah, it's like somebody turned the faucet on in here. You know the interface because we've been on it so long. It doesn't matter how many gimmicks they try, whether they try to make it Snapchat and start stories, whether they try to make it TikTok and start reels, whether they try to prioritize video and it was for JPEG. I mean, it just feels like it's super clunky and super cluttered. And people are older. There's a lot of Gen Xers and millennials on there. It's a lot of parent humor. It's a lot of dog videos. It's a lot of my kids did this crazy thing. I just don't identify with it. But I will say the fashion industry is still on Instagram. And I think it's because it started with JPEGs and it started with visuals. And there's a lot of influencers and people who built their image, quite literally, by curating it on Instagram. TikTok feels more like the real world. Instagram I struggle with. And that's why I use it as very low rung marketing. I'm like, okay, here's the clip from this week. But I don't invest that much time on it. I think if people really want to experience me, they would come to TikTok. And it's also like, it's kind of cringe to be yourself on camera, you know? And I think that's also why when you do it on TikTok and somebody sees it on TikTok, if it's risque, it's like that judgment is alleviated because if you saw me on TikTok, that means you were on TikTok, which means we're the same.
Yeah.
But if you were to post it on Instagram where people don't engage, the novelty is worn off. People are going to watch. They're not going to comment. Everyone's kind of just like clocking each other at all times. I mean, I love social media. It's a double-edged sword like all things are. We all have our woes about it. And TikTok is certainly addicting. The dopamine on that is crazy. That shouldn't even be legal. It should definitely be regulated. You can lose hours, 4 hours easily on TikTok. And that should be studied. But I think it's genius, man. I think it's genius. I love it so much.
In that same vein, Tyler, I don't think it was during the conversation the pair of you had, but he obviously went viral recently for having said that podcasts kind of platform uninformed voices in a lot of cases and just contribute to the noise without any kind of value. And obviously he's a huge fan of your show, and it wasn't necessarily a blanket statement, but as a general observation on the way the sort of digital stratosphere has really democratized media. It made me curious as to whether or not there should be some type of regulation when it comes to people being given access to those sizes of audiences. And obviously that will never be the case because we have things like free media and freedom of speech and the First Amendment. But do you think we've arrived at that point now with such a saturation of outlets where it's just a bunch of talking heads in a lot of cases?
Yeah, for sure. Are there too many people talking? Yeah, of course there are too many people talking. I wouldn't even say that's new. They probably thought that about us before when we were young or the generation before. Every generation has thought less of the generation underneath them for the most part. But I don't think that it needs to be regulated. I think we're going to lean into experts. People are going to curate their own media diet. Do I hear people talking to the sizable audience who don't know what the fuck they're talking about? Yeah, all the time. And I think the way that I have tried to combat that is just by being another offering. And a lot of that is, like I said, in association with the guests. That's a big play there. It would be very different if I was speculating about those guests. And a lot of people do that. The amount of people who built followings by talking about celebrities on these platforms is shocking. Doctors talking about what they think someone got done for plastic surgery. You're never going to beat the impact of what talking to someone directly is at source. Do you know what I mean? So I've made a very clear point of not talking about other people without being in contact with them. I want that person to know who I am, despite everything I've said about Wintour. But she'll know. If she doesn't, if somebody hasn't already tipped her off, she's going to find out about me soon. But you know what I'm saying? It's just, we've gotten in this habit of just talking about things we don't know what we're talking about. We weren't there. So if I'm going to talk shit about something or talk about anything, not even shit, just talk about it, I want it to be because I spoke to the person. And I have that frame of reference to be able to say what I'm saying. And that in and of itself is the credibility that people are looking for. I don't have to say it. You'll be able to know. And I think we're in the era of experts. It's not coming from this ivory tower place of a pedestal of I'm the gatekeeper and I have the keys. You can pick what you want, but choose wisely and choose the person and do your diligence and choose the person who you think is an expert in the field. If I'm getting surgery done, I'm going to do my research on who I think is the best person to do that. I probably won't pick a surgeon who's active on TikTok. I can tell you that. Do you know what I mean? Does it mean that the surgeon's not qualified? Maybe not. But somebody had told me once years ago, you don't want to see your heart surgeon at the club the day before surgery. It doesn't matter how good he is. You just don't want to see them there. Do you know what I mean? Because there's something about it that speaks to, I don't know, a lack of professionalism, a fear. What are you doing here? You should have your head in a book, preparing for my heart surgery tomorrow. I think everyone's going to be talking, but I think social media is, again, where people go to talk. Mm-hmm. I'm on there talking, posting clips of me talking. But I think it's up to each individual talker to find a way to differentiate themselves from the noise, to find a way to make signal throughout all of that noise, and to rise above whatever they're seeing. And everybody has to develop their own competitive advantage. For me, it was like, I don't want to talk about people. I want to talk to them.
What a good line.
Yeah, that in and of itself could offer some level of credibility, right? If that's what we're talking about. But that doesn't mean I can take away from the person that also has an audience. When you're making content, your audience is the boss. So it's up to the audience to decide. We choose people and we decide if we want to platform them or not. But regulation, no, that's impossible. I think the toothpaste, you can't put it back in the jar.
Well, you've mentioned this nod to generational kind of comparisons where we always think that our time was better than what's coming up behind us. But a lot of younger generations today lament the fast pace of change in terms of the constant need to evolve, whether or not that's skill set acquisition or completely changing your vocation in order to sustain your ability to earn an income. It's definitely something that differs from perhaps our parents' generation. I personally find it quite interesting. You're a great example of this, having started pre-med, gone into design, pattern making, podcasting, and the like. But how would you describe your role as you see it today if we were to try to put you in a box? And how do you want your role to evolve in terms of any future planning as things grow with the cutting room floor and everything else you're doing?
You mean my role within the company or my role within like zeitgeist?
Within the world, how you choose to show up. Do you view yourself as an editor, a critic? Do you want to develop a media brand that includes extensions that don't yet exist today? If we were to just distill what it is you do or how you see yourself in the conversation today, how would you describe that role? And how do you want to see that evolve over the years to come?
Well, today I'm a podcaster, but I don't think that has anything to do with who I will be. It's what I said in the beginning about it's already mine, but I haven't realized it in a third dimension yet. So if I said I was a Pulitzer-winning writer, journalist, you'd be like, babe, no, you're not, because that hasn't happened. When Muhammad Ali was just Cassius Clay, a young kid from Kentucky, nobody knew he was going to be the greatest fighter of all time, the greatest boxer of all time. So I think there's something about being in your infantile stage. So today I'm a podcaster. And all those other things you mentioned, an editor by nature, entrepreneur by nature, any independent creator is an entrepreneur. A critic by nature. I'm critical just in the sense that I'm observant, not necessarily in the sense that I'm cynical. There's a difference. Tomorrow, I would love to be respected by the world of journalists because I do respect them so much. And I think if you're going to play in a certain arena, you want the people who are in that arena to co-sign it. So I would love to write. I think there's a lot of things I could say on paper in a book as an author that's a different medium. I would love to build a company, a proper company. And I'm working to do that every day. And that's a huge learning curve because I do think I have an entrepreneurial spirit, which took me many years to learn. I'm a boss, which is an interesting title, even though that's the greatest hack of all time, being a boss. Because like really, you ride the coattails of the amazing people you hire. And then people at the end always think it was you who did it. But really, it's the people you put in place to do it. And that almost feels like some scam. Like the fact that I get to say I'm somebody's boss, when really I have an amazing team of people that do it. And then I get to take the credit. It seems unfair. I guess I would just want, as cliche as it sounds, is to be a good storyteller and to encourage people to be informed and to think for themselves. Really, I think that's the biggest mission. I really want people to think for themselves. I hate groupthink. And even if people don't agree with me, even if I were to get canceled by my audience or whatever that stuff means, I think it's so valuable because I want critical thinkers around me. So encouraging people to think for themselves, to look under the hood, to ask questions, to be curious, to be smart, to be discerning, using that internal measurement, that gut instinct, to trust themselves. That's what I want my work to do ultimately. Now, whether that comes through being an author or a podcaster or a writer or a screenplay or whatever, that's what I hope happens for people who consume what I'm doing.
It's a beautiful intention. And you've talked a lot about the company and its expansion and building a quote unquote real company. So what does that mean to you outside of what it is you're already doing?
I mean, I run a tight ship. It's true. Like I want the best out of people. I want excellence. I want what my father raised me to be and like what I'm striving for. And it's hard. It comes at a cost. It comes at people not liking you sometimes. Same relationship I have with my dad. It can be abrasive to demand excellence from people. And that's what I think about when I think about building a real company. I want to be a global best in class brand, you know, and that is not easy. So I think the cutting room floor is also evolving. It's like taking shape. I don't fully know. I know what I think I want, and we'll see if it lands. But who knows? I thought I wanted to be a designer. So I thought that at one point, that's what I was working towards. So it's hard to say. I want to build a media company. I can say that today in July of 2025. But I'm also going to go where the wind takes me. I really am. I know what I want to do, and I'm going to try to do it. But if I listen to myself more than anything, like my gut, my heart, I can feel myself. And if something feels off, I respond to it with an urgency. Truly, I do. I don't let things get that far. So I have career ambitions. We'll see which ones come true.
I love it. And we can't let you go without asking our favorite question, which every guest has to answer. And that is, what is contemporary now?
Ooh, that's good. What's contemporary now? I think kindness. I think that's the most modern thing. Still, I know it sounds so grandma, like a note she packs in your lunchbox, like be kind, but like it's true. It's chic, it's fashionable, it's so cool. That's not without boundaries. I think niceness is whack, but kindness I think is so powerful, so chic, so beautiful, so elegant. I hope that's contemporary. On TikTok, it feels like it is. Instagram feels like it's mean. TikTok feels kind. Do you know what I'm saying? You go in there and somebody will be like, oh my God, I look like crap. And this happened. And the comments will be like, it's okay, girl. You look fine. You're beautiful. We're rooting for you. And maybe it came from all these movements that happened, whether it was DEI or Me Too or whatever. There was this general empathy movement of we can't be assholes anymore. It's just not getting us anywhere. There's a way to exact your opinion and exact your standards and your boundaries. But if you can do it kindly, that feels more contemporary than the mechanisms of yesterday.
Preach. Thank you so much, Recho. This episode was an absolute gift.
Thank you. This was an incredible interview. You're so well researched and the questions are really fantastic.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of What's Contemporary Now. A special thanks to our producer, Sasha Grinblatt. Audio post-production by Chase Coughlin with original theme music by Joseph Topp-Miller and Chase Coughlin of The Black Soft. And visual design by Aaron Meager and Graham Prentice. Subscribe now to be the first to catch new episodes each week, and if you've enjoyed listening, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a review and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for additional content and join the conversation. Let us know what you think is contemporary now.